Stay put. No deliveries, no food, no calls. Maybe then you'll learn your place.
Those were the cold words Thomas Tommy Fritz spoke as he locked the iron gates of his own mansion, sealing his 7 months pregnant wife inside like a prisoner. Instead of protecting her, he starved her. Instead of compassion, he gave her cruelty and abandonment while she carried his child. He thought he had broken her spirit forever, leaving her to wither behind those bars like she was nothing. But what Tommy never imagined was that the same woman he locked away to starve would one day rise with power that no one could have predicted. A rise that would not only shatter his arrogance but destroy the illusion of control he thought he'd built. Sometimes the ones you cage in darkness return with the keys to everything. Sometimes the woman you thought would beg becomes the one who owns the very ground you stand on. This is the story of a woman betrayed at her most vulnerable who rose with a fortune no one saw coming. And today, it is being retold by me. Hello family, welcome back. Before we begin, I have a small but heartfelt request. Please subscribe. Your support is what keeps these stories alive. Every time you click that button, you're helping us share voices that would otherwise be forgotten and stories that deserve to be heard. Let us know in the comments where you're watching from and how this story touched you. The heat hit like a furnace on that summer afternoon. Agnes Fritz pressed her palms against the iron bars of the mansion gate, her yellow dress clinging to her sweat-soaked skin. Through the decorative metalwork, she watched her husband's white car disappear down the tree-lined drive. "Tommy!" she called out, voice cracking. "Tommy, please, I need food, the baby needs." But the engine roar swallowed her words. He was already gone. Agnes turned back toward the mansion, the sprawling estate with its marble columns and manicured lawns. From the outside, it looked like paradise. From the inside, where she now stood trapped, it felt like a tomb. Her hand moved instinctively to her swollen belly, 7 months heavy with the child Tommy barely acknowledged anymore. The baby kicked strong, insistent, alive. She whispered to it through tears, "I know, sweetheart, I know you're hungry too." This wasn't the first time Tommy had used the gates as punishment, but it was the first time he'd locked them, completely cutting off all deliveries, all help, all dignity. She should have seen it coming. For months, she'd watched him transform from the charming man she'd married into something cold and calculating. The business failures had changed him, the drinking had made it worse, and then came the whispers, women's names, lipstick stains, perfume clinging to his suits. Becca Morris. The morning had started with another fight. Agnes had asked quietly, carefully, if he was seeing someone else. Tommy's response had been immediate and vicious. "You want to know what I'm doing?" he'd snarled, grabbing his keys. "I'm living my life. Something you stopped doing the moment you got pregnant and decided to become this burden." "Tommy, I'm your wife." "You're a mistake," he'd cut her off, voice sharp as broken glass. "One I'm about to correct." He'd walked her to the gate then, almost politely, like a stroll. Agnes hadn't understood until she heard the lock click behind her. "Stay put," he said, cologne mixing with the sharp scent of whiskey even this early in the day. "No deliveries, no food, no calls. Maybe then you'll learn your place." She'd reached through the bars, desperate. "Tommy, please, the baby." He leaned close, lips curling into a smirk, and delivered the line that would burn in her memory forever. "Starve if you want, Agnes. You and that baby mean nothing to me." Then he slid into his car and roared away, calling out loud enough for the gardener to hear, "If anyone asks, tell them my wife is resting, doctor's orders." Agnes had stood frozen as reality sank in. He wasn't coming back. Not today. Maybe not tomorrow. And she was locked inside with no food, no phone, no way to call for help. A window creaked open on the second floor. Consuela, the cleaner, looked out with worried eyes. She made a small gesture, hand to heart, then pointing down, "I'll help when I can." It was the smallest comfort, but Agnes clung to it. She trudged back to the mansion's entrance, past guards who looked away. Inside the marble foyer, the silence was suffocating. She went to the kitchen, praying it wasn't locked. Relief, it opened. She gulped down water, found 2 dry slices of bread, and forced them down. It wasn't enough. Not for her. Not for the baby. Tears filled her eyes as she whispered to her belly, "I'm sorry, my love. I'll protect you somehow." The landline was locked in his office. Her cell had been cut off weeks ago. She was truly cut off at the mercy of a man with no mercy left. Hours passed in shadows until the service door cracked open. Consuela slipped inside with a paper bag. "Pan dulce." "Fruit, water," she whispered. "I hide it from him." Agnes choked back a sob. "Consuela, thank you, but if he finds out—" "He won't," Consuela said firmly. "That man is not a man anymore. He is something cruel." She touched Agnes's belly. "This baby deserves better. You deserve better." Agnes broke. "I don't know what to do." "You survive," Consuela said simply. She glanced nervously at the hall, then added, "And maybe it is time to open the envelope, the one behind the dresser, the one with the lawyer's name." Before Agnes could respond, she was gone. Agnes froze. She knew exactly which envelope. The thick cream paper with the embossed crest of Ellison and Grant, attorneys at law, the one she'd hidden for 6 months. The one that proved she wasn't just Tommy's pregnant wife. She was Agnes Ellison, the sole heir to her grandfather Franklin D. Ellison's $600 million estate. Agnes clutched the envelope to her chest, her heart pounding. Outside, Tommy was probably laughing with Becca, certain he had won, certain his wife was broken. But inside that envelope was the truth, the kind that could burn his entire world to ash. And Agnes Ellison Fritz was about to learn that sometimes the only way to survive is to rise. The envelope still sat heavy in Agnes's drawer, but she left it untouched. It wasn't time yet. If Tommy taught her anything, it was patience in the face of cruelty, waiting for the right moment to act. She pulled the curtains open. Sunlight spilled into the room, harsh and accusing. Beyond the glass stretched acres of perfectly trimmed lawn, fountains spraying water into the air like a performance. All for show. Everything Tommy built was for appearance's sake. The outside always had to gleam, even while the inside rotted. Agnes turned away. She couldn't stare at the beauty of the estate without tasting the bitterness underneath. Her life hadn't started in marble mansions or champagne dinners. She came from red clay roads and small-town Georgia heat, from a 2-bedroom house where love filled the space money never could. Her father worked long hours at the mill until his hands stiffened with age. Her mother made ends meet stitching clothes for neighbors and baking pies for church sales. They never had much, but they had enough. Enough to raise a daughter who knew kindness mattered more than wealth. It was that kindness, that quiet dignity, that Tommy Fritz first noticed. She remembered the night like it was stitched into her skin. A charity gala in Atlanta. Agnes wasn't supposed to be there at all. A college friend dragged her along, begging her to help serve wine to the donors. Agnes borrowed a dress that hung too loose on her frame and pinned her hair with trembling fingers. She'd planned to stay in the background, invisible, but Tommy had seen her anyway. He cut through the crowd with practiced charm, all smiles and easy confidence, ignoring the glittering socialites who clawed for his attention. His gaze locked on hers. "You don't belong in the shadows," he'd said as he pulled her into a dance, his hand warm against her back. "You belong beside me." The words burned through her, then sweet, intoxicating, a fairy tale invitation. She was 22, too young to see the danger in someone who could say the perfect line without hesitation, too hopeful to notice the edges of arrogance in his grin. Tommy swept her into his world within months. Rooftop dinners, whispered promises, trips to Miami where the water glittered as blue as his eyes. He spoke of empires he would build, fortunes he would win. He made her believe she wasn't just loved, but chosen for something grand. When he slipped a diamond ring onto her finger, Agnes thought she had stepped into a story that only ended happily ever after. But dreams rot fast when they're built on fragile foundations. The first cracks appeared after their wedding-failed ventures, partnerships gone sour, whispers of reckless spending. Tommy's businesses bled money, but instead of slowing down, he sped up, chasing risk after risk. Agnes saw the toll in the hollows under his eyes, the tremble in his hands, but every time she asked, he brushed her off. And when the money dried up, the whiskey bottles multiplied. He stopped coming home for dinner. His words grew short, sharp, slicing her down when she dared to question him. At first, she told herself it was stress. She remembered the man from the gala, the man who had pulled her into a dance. Surely he was still in there, buried beneath the failures and the shame. But the man she'd married was gone, or maybe, she thought bitterly, he'd never really existed at all. In the mansion, she wasn't truly alone, not entirely. There was Consuela, the cleaner, who kept her head down but always found a way to leave a little kindness behind. A folded blanket left at the edge of Agnes's bed when nights grew cold. An extra roll of bread tucked beneath a napkin when Agnes ate in the kitchen. A whispered prayer, murmured in Spanish, as she dusted the marble staircase. Consuela never said much, but her eyes said enough. They said, "I see you, I know." And then there was Humberto, the gate guard. Stern-faced, broad-shouldered, he rarely spoke more than a few words when Tommy was near. But on the nights when Tommy disappeared with his car and didn't return until dawn, Humberto would tip his cap to Agnes as she passed, his eyes soft with unspoken pity. Two small mercies in a house built on cruelty. But mercies couldn't protect her from the truth that crept in like poison. She had ignored it at first, the whispers of names on Tommy's phone, the late-night calls cut short when she walked into the room. She wanted to believe he was still hers, even if broken, even if cruel. She wanted to believe her love could fix him. Then she found the lipstick. Red, smudged across his collar, careless and deliberate all at once. He didn't even bother to hide it. Becca Morris. The name hissed in her mind like a serpent, a woman younger, flashier, shallow as glitter. She had seen her once, in a tabloid photo, long legs, tight dress, smile painted wide but eyes hollow. Exactly the kind of distraction Tommy would crave now that his wife was swollen with child and no longer the polished trophy he'd paraded at galas. Agnes had asked him once, her voice trembling, "Who is she?" He'd smirked. "Someone who reminds me life isn't about sacrifices. You wouldn't understand." Her hands had shaken so badly she nearly dropped the glass she was holding. She had swallowed her pain. She didn't scream, didn't beg, didn't let him see the devastation clawing inside her. She turned her face to the window and let him walk away, because tears in front of Tommy only made him crueler. But that night, when the house was silent, she found the leather-bound book her grandfather had given her, the one that smelled faintly of old paper and cedar. His words echoed in her memory. "Write what matters, Agnes. Someday, these pages will remind you who you are." She opened it and began to write. Her handwriting trembled, ink blurring where tears fell, but she wrote anyway. "He thinks I am nothing, he thinks I am replaceable, but my blood tells a different story. He doesn't know the truth of me, the legacy inside me. One day, this will end, and when it does, I will not break, I will rise." She closed the journal, pressing it to her chest, as if it could shield her from the emptiness that pressed in from every corner of the mansion. Outside, the fountains sprayed, the lawns gleamed, the world believed the Fritzes were untouchable. Inside, Agnes began to stitch together her quiet defiance with ink and tears. It wasn't strength yet, not fully, but it was something that Tommy Fritz would never see coming. The leather journal lay closed on her lap, the faint scent of cedar rising from its worn pages. Agnes traced the embossed initials on the cover with her fingertip, her grandfather's gift now transformed into her only confidant. In those pages, she could release her fear without judgment, whisper her truth without interruption. But closing it didn't quiet the silence. The silence pressed in, heavy, endless, broken only by the distant tick of the grandfather clock in the hall. It was a house full of echoes, not warmth. Agnes rose and paced to the window again. Outside, Humberto's silhouette stood at the gate, unmoving as a sentinel. She wondered if he sensed her watching. The guard never lingered with words, but she could feel the unspoken solidarity in the tilt of his shoulders, the slow nod when their eyes sometimes met through glass and distance. Small mercies, she reminded herself. Her gaze shifted toward the driveway. She imagined Tommy's sleek car turning in, headlights cutting through the dusk, him stepping out with that swagger of his, reeking of whiskey and perfume that didn't belong to her. The image turned her stomach. She pressed a hand to her belly, grounding herself in the rhythmic kicks. "It's just us for now," she whispered to the life within, "but that's enough. We'll outlast this." The mansion's corridors stretched endlessly, each step echoing like a hollow drumbeat. Agnes moved past the portraits Tommy had hung, paintings of himself in grandiose poses, as if he were already immortalized. She remembered the day he commissioned the largest one, insisting it belong above the staircase. "It'll remind everyone who built this house," he'd told her, puffed with pride. Agnes hadn't said what she thought then, that the estate had been purchased with loans, not triumph, and the walls were mortgaged to the bone. She had kept quiet, just as she had so many times before, swallowing her unease like bitter medicine. Now, she lingered before the portrait, studying the self-satisfied smirk frozen in oil and canvas. To anyone else it was confidence. To her it was arrogance sharpened into cruelty. Her lips tightened. "Paper empires," she muttered. She drifted into the kitchen. The stainless steel counters gleamed, but the cupboards were sparse. Tommy liked control even over what she ate. Deliveries came only when he ordered them. She reached for a half-empty jar of peanut butter and dug a spoon into it, swallowing slowly. It was bland but filling enough to quiet the hunger pains. As she rinsed the spoon, the service door creaked. Consuela slipped in, carrying a folded rag in her hand as cover. She lowered her voice. "Señora, are you well?" Agnes forced a faint smile. "As well as I can be." Consuela's dark eyes softened. "I left some fruit in the laundry basket. Hide it. If he knows, he will take it." Agnes's throat tightened. "You risk too much for me." The cleaner shook her head. "You are not alone, Señora. Some of us still remember kindness. That man—" She glanced around, lowering her voice further. "He is empty, but you carry life." Her gaze dropped to Agnes's belly with reverence. Before Agnes could reply, the door clicked again and Consuela vanished into the hall, her rag pressed tight against her chest as if it were her shield. The kitchen felt colder without her presence. Agnes carried the basket upstairs and found the bananas and bread tucked beneath folded sheets. She sat on the bed, tears prickling her eyes as she peeled the first piece of fruit. It wasn't just food, it was proof someone still cared if she survived. As she ate, her mind wandered back to the early days, when Tommy's promises had seemed endless. The glittering dinners, the way he paraded her on his arm, whispering about empires. She used to feel proud, thinking she had been chosen for greatness, but those whispers had curdled. Now she heard them in Becca's laughter. She had never met the girl properly, but she'd seen the photos magazines splashing Becca's face across glossy spreads as the new darling of the elite. Becca thrived on attention, always posing, always ready for the camera. Agnes imagined her with Tommy at that very moment, laughing about the woman locked in a mansion, oblivious to the truth hidden in an envelope upstairs. The thought carved her deeper than hunger ever could. She tightened her grip on the banana peel until it tore. Later, in the stillness of night, she returned to her journal. She lit a small lamp, its glow casting long shadows across the walls. She opened to a fresh page, ink scratching across paper as she poured her thoughts into sentences that steadied her hand. Day 2 of his silence. "The house is an echo chamber, every corner a reminder of what I lost. But I am not defeated. I write to remember. I write so my child will one day know that their mother endured. I cannot let him erase me." She paused, the words pulling her back to another memory. Her grandfather's voice, low and steady, echoing from years ago. "Agnes," he had said, placing the journal in her hands on her 18th birthday, "the world will try to tell you who you are, but these pages will remind you, do not let anyone take that truth." She closed her eyes, gripping the pen tighter. "I won't, grandfather," she whispered into the silence. "Not now, not ever." The night stretched long. Somewhere past midnight, muffled voices drifted from outside. She crossed to the window and saw headlights flash near the gate. Tommy's car pulled in, swerving slightly before halting. The driver's door swung open and he stumbled out, laughter spilling into the night. Becca's silhouette followed. She wore a short red dress that glittered under the lights, her heels clicking against the driveway. Tommy pulled her close, pressing a kiss against her lips without a care for who might be watching. Agnes gripped the curtain tight, forcing herself not to look away. Pain burned through her chest, but she refused to cower. Humberto's figure stood nearby, stiff and silent. For the briefest moment, his eyes flicked up toward the mansion window where Agnes stood. He didn't speak, but she saw the pity there, the silent acknowledgement of her humiliation. Tommy laughed louder, his voice carrying into the night. "Let her rot," he sneered, not knowing his wife was watching from the shadows above. Agnes's nails dug into her palm until her skin ached. She pulled the curtain closed and returned to the desk. She pressed her pen to the paper and wrote a final line before snapping the journal shut. "He believes I am nothing. But one day, he will choke on the truth." The lamp flickered, shadows dancing across the walls, but Agnes sat steady in the glow. Her resolve had begun to take root. The hotel room smelled of champagne and expensive perfume, a haze of indulgence that clung to the silk sheets. Neon lights from downtown Atlanta flickered through the window, painting the walls in restless color. Tommy lounged against the headboard, a glass of bourbon in his hand, while Becca Morris sprawled across the bed like she already owned it. "Agnes is finished," Tommy declared, his voice thick with liquor and arrogance. "She's weak, barely eats, barely speaks. Just a shadow, soon she'll be gone, and then, baby, you'll wear the ring." Becca's lips curled into a practiced smile. She loved the sound of that, the ring, the promise of permanence, the whisper of legitimacy. No longer a mistress tucked into corners and hotel suites, but a wife displayed in diamonds and designer gown. She leaned closer, pressing her cheek against his chest. "You mean it, Tommy? No more hiding?" He smirked, tipping his glass before draining it. "I mean it. The mansion will be yours. The parties, the cars, the accounts. You'll sit at the head of the table where she used to sit." Becca closed her eyes, letting the fantasy bloom in her mind. She saw herself walking through the grand foyer, sunlight glittering across marble floors polished to perfection. Staff lined the staircase, heads bowed as she passed. In her dream, she wore a silk gown, emerald green, the kind that made photographers gasp and magazines fight for her cover. Every room echoed with her name, Becca Fritz, not Morris. Fritz. She pictured her reflection in the gilded mirror, draped in jewels Tommy had promised. She would host charity balls, luncheons, soirees where cameras flashed as she raised her champagne flute. The whispers of society would shift from scandalous mistress to untouchable queen. In her mind, even the air inside the mansion belonged to her. She opened her eyes and laughed softly, running a finger along Tommy's jawline. "I'll look good in that house, won't I?" He chuckled, pulling her closer. "Better than Agnes ever did." The words burned like victory. Back at the mansion, the mood was different. The house was quiet, the only sound the faint hum of the refrigerator and the rhythmic sweep of Consuela's broom across the tiled kitchen floor. She worked quickly, her body bent in practiced movements, but her eyes kept flicking toward the staircase. She had noticed the change in Agnes, the way her gaze lingered on the drawer by the nightstand, the way her fingers brushed against it as if it held something more than wood and brass. Tonight, curiosity gnawed at her. When the upstairs hall grew still, Consuela slipped into the bedroom. The air smelled faintly of lavender from the sachet Agnes kept tucked under her pillow. On the dresser sat the journal, closed, and beside it a drawer left ajar. Consuela hesitated only a moment before sliding it open. Inside, beneath folded scarves, lay a thick envelope. Its paper was heavy, ivory-colored, stamped with a crest she recognized even before reading the letters, Ellison and Grant, attorneys at law. Her heart pounded. She glanced toward the door, listening for footsteps. None came. With trembling fingers she lifted the envelope. It carried weight, the kind that made her palms sweat. She slid it open carefully and pulled out the contents. Her eyes widened. Deeds, transfers, sealed documents, words that blurred together, but one phrase stood out clearly, repeated across multiple pages: sole heir. Consuela's lips parted in shock. The numbers staggered her figures, written with more zeros than she had ever imagined. $600 million. Her knees nearly buckled. She whispered a prayer in Spanish, crossing herself quickly before sliding the papers back into their sheath. When she replaced the envelope, her hands shook. She had known Agnes was different. There was a dignity in her suffering, a quiet strength that didn't match the picture of a woman beaten down. Now Consuela understood. Agnes carried a secret so enormous it could shatter everything Tommy believed he controlled. The cleaner shut the drawer and exhaled shakily, whispering again, "Madre de Dios." At that moment, the door creaked open. Agnes stood in the threshold, one hand resting on her rounded belly, her eyes calm but sharp. Consuela froze, words tumbling in her throat. Signora, forgive me, I shouldn't. Agnes raised a hand, silencing her gently. She crossed the room, her steps measured, her face serene as if she had expected this all along. You saw it, didn't you? She said quietly. Consuela lowered her head. I didn't mean... It's all right. Agnes's tone held no anger, only weariness. She reached into the drawer, withdrew the envelope, and laid it on the bedspread between them. You were bound to find it one day. Perhaps it's better you did. She sat on the edge of the bed, stroking the crest with her thumb. Her eyes seemed distant, fixed on a memory. I knew about this long before I married him, she said softly. My grandfather left it for me. He wanted me to inherit not just money but a name, a legacy. But I never told Tommy, not once. Consuela lifted her gaze, astonished. Why, Señora? Agnes gave a sad smile. Because I wanted love, not a man chasing gold. If I told him, he would have married the inheritance, not me, so I kept it locked away, believing his promises were enough. Her fingers tightened around the envelope, but promises crumble, and now, here we are. The cleaner's eyes brimmed with tears, torn between awe and sorrow. He doesn't know? No, Agnes whispered. He thinks I am helpless. He thinks I am trapped. Let him. For the first time in weeks, something flickered in her expression, not resignation, but quiet power. Consuela crossed herself again, whispering, Signora, this changes everything. Agnes pressed the envelope against her chest and closed her eyes. Yes, she murmured, it changes everything. But until the time is right, it remains between us. The night deepened around them. Somewhere downtown, Tommy toasted Becca with hollow promises, but inside the mansion, another truth pulsed, steady and silent, waiting to rise. And Agnes, no longer only a prisoner of cruelty, held the secret like a weapon cloaked in paper and ink. Agnes didn't move for a long while after Consuela left her alone. The envelope rested on her knees, heavier than stone, though its weight was nothing compared to the burden it carried. $600 million, an empire in paper form. Her fingers traced the seal again and again. To Tommy, she was a liability, a burden dragging him down. To Becca, she was already a discarded relic. But here, in ink and signatures, lay the truth. She was the one holding the crown neither of them could ever touch. Agnes slid the documents back into the envelope, pressing it beneath her pillow. She felt its edges against her cheek as she lay down, like a reminder whispering through the night. You are not powerless. Not anymore. Downtown, the music pulsed through the club's velvet walls. Becca moved in rhythm to the bass, her sequined dress catching light with every sway. She relished the stares, the envy written across women's faces, the hunger gleaming in men's eyes. Tommy leaned against the bar, eyes glued to her with the intoxicated adoration of a man convinced he had already won. He whispered to a friend nearby, "That's the future, Mrs. Fritz. You'll see." Becca caught the words, her smile widening as if destiny itself had nodded in her direction. She lifted her glass high, imagining photographers capturing the moment. Soon, the world will forget Agnes, she thought, and remember me. Her fantasy played out in her head, her hand adorned with a flawless diamond, her name etched into charity invitations, her face splashed across society pages. She pictured herself giving orders to staff in the mansion, sitting in Agnes's chair at the dining table, receiving bows and smiles. Becca's dreams painted the future in gold, blind to the cracks beneath her feet. At the mansion, Agnes lit a single lamp on her desk. The faint glow spilled over her journal as she began to write again. Her words were steady this time, each stroke deliberate, her resolve etched in ink. He thinks I have nothing, but I have everything. Not because of what these papers say, but because I finally see the truth of who he is. The man who once lifted me into a dance has become a stranger, yet I refuse to let him destroy what remains of me. She closed the book and stared at the lamp's flame. The shadows stretched across the wall like looming figures, and for the first time she didn't shrink beneath them. She let them surround her, knowing she had her own shadow to cast now. Downstairs, Consuela whispered in the pantry, speaking softly into the hum of appliances, as if the walls themselves might betray her. "Señor Humberto," she murmured when she found the guard at the service door. "She is stronger than he knows. One day he will regret this. Humberto adjusted his cap, his expression unreadable. Careful, he warned. Secrets are fire. They can warm, but they can also burn. Consuela nodded, but her eyes gleamed with quiet faith. This fire will burn the right ones. Hours later, Tommy returned. His laughter echoed down the marble hall before he even stepped inside. Becca clung to his arm, the scent of champagne on her breath, her giggles slicing through the silence. Agnes remained upstairs, listening to the chaos seep into the house like poison. She heard their footsteps, their muffled whispers, the creak of the guest room door as it opened. Rage twisted in her stomach, sharp as glass, but she stayed still. She knew better than to storm down the stairs. Let them revel. Let them believe she was broken. The greater their delusion, the sharper their fall. She slipped the envelope deeper under her pillow, whispering to her unborn child, "Patience, we will wait, and when the day comes, no one will question who truly belongs." Morning broke with sunlight pouring mercilessly through the curtains. Becca awoke in the guest room draped in silk, stretching like a cat in a bed that wasn't hers. She wandered to the mirror, practicing smiles she imagined would grace magazine covers. She imagined servants rushing to answer her commands. When Tommy appeared in the doorway, she threw her arms around him. "It all feels so real," she purred, "like the life I've always wanted." He kissed her forehead. "It's already yours, just a matter of time." They shared a laugh, oblivious to the storm gathering above their heads. Agnes sat at her vanity, braiding her hair slowly. The mirror reflected a woman pale but unbroken, her hand steady as she tied the braid off with a ribbon. She thought of her grandfather, his steady gaze, his lessons about legacy. "It's not the gold that defines you," he had once said. "It's how you hold it when the world tries to snatch it from your hands." She whispered the words aloud, letting them anchor her. Her eyes shifted to the pillow. Beneath it, the envelope waited. Not just a fortune, but a lifeline. A reminder that the house Tommy paraded Becca through was not his to give away. Not now, not ever. Becca joined Tommy for breakfast in the dining hall, the chandelier's crystals scattering sunlight across her face. She leaned back in the chair that belonged to Agnes, sipping orange juice as though she were already mistress of the mansion. "This could be ours forever," she said, voice dripping with satisfaction. Tommy grinned, slapping her hand with bravado. "It will be, trust me." Above them, Agnes stood at the top of the stairs, silent, unseen. Her hand rested on the banister, her eyes calm as she watched. They didn't know she was there. They didn't know the papers lay safe under her pillow, waiting for the moment she chose to reveal them. They didn't know the woman they dismissed as finished had already written the script for their undoing. Agnes turned away before they noticed her, retreating into her room. She pressed the journal open and wrote one more line, her pen scratching fiercely against the page. "The dream belongs to her for now, but reality belongs to me." The evening air was heavy with the scent of magnolia blossoms drifting through the iron gates. Humberto adjusted his cap, scanning the driveway the way he always did, calm, steady, eyes missing nothing. From his post, he had watched more than most would ever know. He saw Tommy stagger home at all hours, smelled the perfume that clung to his suits, heard the laughter of the woman who wasn't his wife. He also noticed the drawn curtains upstairs where Agnes rarely left her room, the silence that wrapped around her like chains. But tonight was different. When Consuela approached him by the service entrance, her face was pale, her voice trembling. "Señor Humberto," she whispered, glancing around, "there is something you must know, something important." She pressed a folded paper into his hands, the copy she had scribbled from memory after glimpsing the envelope. Humberto read slowly, his eyes widening at the crest, the words "sole heir," the staggering sum scrawled beside her notes. He looked up, his jaw tightening. 600 million? Consuela nodded once. "Agnes, it belongs to her, not to him." For a long moment, Humberto stood in silence, his weathered hands clutching the paper. Then he folded it neatly, tucking it into his pocket. His voice was low but fierce. "Then she is not a prisoner here. She is a queen, and no queen shall go unguarded while I stand at this gate." Later that night, Agnes heard the faintest knock on her door. She rose cautiously, opening it to find Humberto in the hall, his posture formal, cap in hand. He bowed his head slightly before speaking. "Señora," he said, voice steady, "I know now about what you carry, about what is rightfully yours." Agnes's breath caught, but his expression held no malice, only loyalty carved deep into his weathered face. "You are not weak," he continued. "You are not broken. They may treat you as if you are trapped here, but I tell you the truth, you are not a prisoner, you are a queen, and I will protect you as one." Her eyes blurred with sudden tears. She reached out, resting her hand against his arm. "Humberto, why would you risk so much for me?" His answer was simple. "Because a man must choose who he serves. I choose to serve honor. And you, Señora, are the only honor left in this house." Agnes's chest swelled with a warmth she hadn't felt in months. She nodded, whispering, "Thank you." Days blended quietly after that. Tommy was rarely home, and when he was, he came and went in a storm of arrogance and liquor. In his absence, the mansion's true heartbeat came from its shadows: Consuela's quiet footsteps, Humberto's vigilant watch. Consuela became Agnes's lifeline. She smuggled fruit in folded linens, bread wrapped inside laundry bundles, even warm broth hidden in a thermos beneath her cleaning supplies. Each small offering carried more than sustenance. It carried hope. "Eat, Señora," Consuela would whisper as she slipped a plate onto the nightstand. "You must be strong for you, for the baby." Agnes would take her hand, squeezing gently. "You're saving me more than you know." The cleaner shook her head. "No, Señora, you save yourself, I only bring the tools." Agnes began to feel her strength slowly return. The hollowness in her cheeks softened, her body steadied, her spirit sparked with faint light. At night she sat by the window, hand pressed to her swelling belly, whispering to the child within. "Better days are coming," she murmured. "I promise you that. You will not be born into darkness. You will know love and safety and a mother who fought for you." The baby kicked, strong and insistent, and she smiled through her tears. Humberto proved true to his word. He lingered longer by the mansion doors, eyes sharp, intercepting deliveries meant only for Tommy. Once, when a messenger arrived with documents Tommy had signed in haste, Humberto slipped Agnes a warning. "He is selling what is not his. Be patient. The day will come when truth burns louder than his lies." Agnes nodded, her fingers brushing the hidden envelope beneath her pillow that never left her sight. "The day will come," she echoed. In the stillness of her room, the journal grew thicker with entries. She wrote not only her pain but also her plans, dreams she once buried now taking shape on paper. She recorded every detail she noticed: dates Tommy left, names Becca boasted about, the accounts he bragged of. It became not just a diary but a ledger, a quiet record of his arrogance. "One day, this will all matter," she wrote. "One day they will see the truth he tried to bury." Though she remained outwardly silent, inside Agnes had begun to shift. No longer the woman begging for scraps of attention, she was a woman with allies who saw her worth. The mansion had become her cage, yes, but also her fortress, and with Consuela and Humberto at her side, she knew she would not endure forever. For now, she held her silence. But silence, Agnes realized, was not weakness. Silence could be strategy. The ballroom shimmered under crystal chandeliers, each prism scattering light across the polished marble floor. Waiters glided past with silver trays, laughter echoed against gilded walls, and the scent of expensive cigars curled lazily in the air. In the center of it all, Tommy Fritz thrived. His hand gripped Becca's waist as he paraded her through the gala, introducing her with a grin too wide, too forced. She wore a sapphire gown, plunging in all the places designed to steal attention, her arm draped around his as if she had already claimed him as prize. "Tommy, you've outdone yourself," a banker laughed as they clinked glasses. "A new face on your arm and still the same charm." Becca blushed on cue, soaking in the envy of women nearby. She liked the whispers, the subtle daggers in the eyes of socialites who once ignored her. Every comment of approval wrapped around her like another jewel. Tommy ordered the most expensive champagne, demanded the orchestra play their favorite song, tipped staff with bills he couldn't afford. To him, it didn't matter. The illusion of wealth was as good as the real thing, so long as people kept watching. But whispers traveled fast in rooms like these. Near the bar, two investors exchanged glances. "He spends like he's sitting on oil," one muttered. The other shook his head. "Word is, the Fritz accounts are bone dry, loans stacked higher than that champagne tower, and now he parades this girl around like a trophy? It reeks of desperation." Their laughter was quiet, cruel. They weren't the only ones. Throughout the evening, more murmurs spread behind fans, over glasses, in the corners where deals were struck. Tommy didn't notice. He basked in the glow of Becca's laughter, the clink of glasses raised in shallow admiration. Becca twirled beneath the chandeliers, convinced the world finally saw her as she deserved to be seen. She believed the mansion was already hers, that Agnes was nothing more than a fading shadow. Back at the estate, Agnes sat in her dimly lit room, listening to the grandfather clock chime through the halls. She had no jewels, no orchestra, no glittering crowd, but she had something Tommy never noticed: quiet strength gathering like a tide. Consuela brought her a small plate of food and sat at the edge of the bed. "They talk in town," she whispered. "People see him, Senora. They see the woman with him. They see the money he throws like fire." Agnes listened, one hand circling her belly. "Let them see," she murmured. "Every coin he burns only clears the path for truth." Consuela's eyes softened. "The more he shows himself, the more blind they are to you." Agnes smiled faintly. "And that blindness will be his undoing." Humberto meanwhile heard the same whispers at the gate. Delivery drivers spoke, tradesmen muttered as they passed. "Fritz is losing control," they said. "The man throws parties with nothing in his pockets." Humberto repeated none of it to Tommy. Instead, he kept his eyes fixed on the iron gates, his thoughts steady. Each rumor was another stone stacked against the master he no longer respected. When he caught a glance of Agnes through the window, seated tall with her hand over her stomach, he nodded to himself. "The queen waits," he thought. "And when she rises, the world will remember her, not him." Another week, another gala. Tommy strutted into a country club ballroom, Becca gleaming beside him. This time he commissioned an entire fireworks display, the kind reserved for national holidays. Guests clapped and cheered, dazzled by the spectacle, but behind their applause was disbelief. "How much debt do you think that cost him?" one whispered. "Doesn't matter," another replied. "The banks won't hold his leash forever." And then, quietly, "Funny how no one's seen his wife in months." The word spread like wildfire. Where was Agnes Fritz? Had she left him? Was she too humiliated to show her face? Rumors painted her as broken, hidden, discarded, and Tommy never corrected them. In fact, he relished them. "She's gone," he told one inquisitive guest with a smirk. "Out of the picture, it's just me and Becca now." Becca preened, sipping champagne as though the declaration crowned her. What neither of them realized was that silence carried weight. Agnes's absence was not weakness, it was mystery. And mystery, once cracked open, could change everything. At the mansion, Agnes rocked slowly in her chair, whispering lullabies her mother once sang. Her journal lay open beside her, filled with observations and notes. She wrote one final line before closing it for the night. "The world believes I am silent. They believe silence means defeat. But silence is where power grows unseen, steady, inevitable." She placed the journal atop the envelope, her two anchors side by side. Downstairs, Consuela extinguished the last candle. Humberto locked the gates with a sharp click. The house, though dim and quiet, felt less like a prison than it once had. Because now, even in her silence, Agnes was no longer alone. Meanwhile, Tommy and Becca basked in borrowed light, oblivious that the whispers gathering behind them were the same whispers that would one day bring their empire crashing down. The crunch of gravel announced their arrival before Agnes even reached the window. She heard the purr of the engine, the screech of tires halting at the gates. For a fleeting second, her heart leapt. Was Tommy really back? Was he sober? Was he alone? But when she parted the curtain, her pulse dropped. There he was, suited like a man going to war with the world, sunglasses gleaming, grin sharp as a blade. And beside him, in the passenger seat, sat Becca. Her hair was pinned high, earrings swinging like trophies, her mouth stretched into the kind of smirk meant to wound. They weren't visiting, they were performing. Humberto stood stiffly by the iron gate, his knuckles white around the keys. His jaw flexed, but he said nothing as Tommy leaned out of the driver's window, honking twice, the sound crude against the quiet street. "Agnes!" Tommy's voice carried across the courtyard, mocking, theatrical. "Come on out, darling, don't be shy." Agnes froze at her window. Consuela appeared at her side, whispering, "Don't go, Señora. Let them bark from the street." But Agnes's spine stiffened. She pressed her palm against her belly, drew in a breath, and walked down the staircase, step after step, until she reached the front doors. The air outside was thick with heat. She crossed the lawn with deliberate calm until she stood just inside the gates, Humberto a sentinel at her side. Becca leaned forward in the car, resting her chin on her palm. "Look at her," she sneered, loud enough for every guard and gardener to hear. All pale and frail, weak, finished. Tommy laughed, tapping the wheel. "You're lucky I let you stay in that big house at all. You should be thanking me. Without me, you're nothing." The words hung in the air, thick as smoke. Agnes said nothing. She kept her eyes level, her hands steady, one resting firmly over the swell of her stomach. She would not weep, not before them. She would not break, not where Becca could gloat. Becca tilted her head, her laughter shrill. "Oh, she's trying to look brave. Isn't that cute?" She blew a kiss through the open window. "Enjoy your little cage, sweetheart. We'll enjoy the world." Agnes's lips pressed into a line. No answer, no plea. Only silence, carved out of stone. Tommy revved the engine, impatience flashing in his smirk. "Pathetic," he muttered. "She'll crumble soon enough." The car roared as it pulled away, Becca's laughter trailing behind like poison in the wind. Agnes remained still at the gate, long after they vanished, the gravel dust settling around her shoes. Humberto glanced at her, his face carved with fury he dared not voice. "Señora," he said softly, "you gave them nothing. They came to humiliate you, and you gave them nothing." Agnes turned her gaze back to the house, her hand steady on her belly. "Then let that be their disappointment." That night, the house was quiet except for the scratch of pen against paper. Agnes sat at her desk, lamplight spilling across her journal. Her handwriting was firmer than before, each word carved with conviction. "You locked me in to starve," she wrote, "but you cannot starve destiny. You call me finished, but I am only waiting. I will not feed your cruelty with my tears. I will feed my child with the strength you tried to steal." She paused, staring at the words, and then added, "This silence is not surrender. It is preparation." She shut the journal, sliding it under her pillow beside the envelope, her twin secrets safe and waiting. Across town, in a modest law office lined with oak shelves, Daniel Ellison sat behind his desk, reading through a case file by lamplight. His hair was silver at the temples, his posture precise, his eyes sharp behind his glasses. A knock interrupted the quiet. His assistant entered, holding a sealed note. "From the Fritz estate," she said softly. Daniel broke the seal, scanning the words with care. Consuela's handwriting was neat, hurried, but clear. "She is ready," it read. "She carries the truth in silence, but she is no longer alone. Watch for my signal." Daniel leaned back in his chair, steepling his fingers. A slow smile curved his lips, not of amusement but of resolve. "At last," he murmured. He placed the letter carefully into a folder marked with the crest of Ellison and Grant. Then he closed the folder with deliberate weight, as though sealing a promise. Back at the mansion, Agnes slept more soundly than she had in weeks. The night no longer pressed down on her chest. She had faced their cruelty at the gate, endured it without cracking, and now a new thought glowed in her mind. Humiliation could not define her. Resolve would. And when the day came to open her mouth and speak, the world would not hear the voice of a victim. It would hear the voice of the rightful heir. Morning broke with the sharp cries of crows perched along the estate walls. Agnes stirred awake, the faint trace of resolve from the night before still burning like an ember in her chest. She rose slowly, her hand grazing the envelope beneath her pillow, the journal resting nearby. Together, they had become her shield and her sword. She moved to the window, pulling back the curtains just enough to glimpse the garden. Humberto was already at his post, posture straight, gaze steady. When their eyes met, he tipped his cap in silent recognition. No words were needed. His loyalty was carved in that small gesture. Downstairs, Consuela busied herself with breakfast preparations, though the clatter of dishes carried a rhythm unlike the usual hum of chores. There was intention in each step, each glance over her shoulder, each soft humming note. She glanced up when Agnes entered, slipping a small basket toward her beneath the counter. Inside lay fresh bread, a wedge of cheese, and a small flask of warm tea. "You must keep strong, Señora," Consuela whispered. "For him, for her, whoever waits inside you." Agnes's throat tightened, but she swallowed back the rush of tears. "Strength," she repeated softly. "That is all I can give now." Across town, Daniel Ellison straightened the papers on his desk, each page neatly aligned. His law office was quiet except for the ticking of a grandfather clock and the rustle of files. He tapped a pen against the folder marked Fritz Estate, his eyes distant, mind turning over every possible move. He had served the Ellison family name for decades, advising in boardrooms, testifying in court, watching fortunes rise and fall. But this was different. Here was a woman silenced, hidden, underestimated, yet carrying the key to an empire larger than most dared to imagine. "Agnes Reuben Fritz," he murmured, reading the name aloud, tasting the weight it carried. "They'll learn soon enough what those letters mean." A knock at his door broke his thought. His assistant entered with a telegram. Daniel scanned it quickly, a message from an associate downtown, confirming rumors of Tommy Fritz's reckless spending. Lavish galas, fireworks, debts piling, the note summarized. Daniel folded the slip, placing it atop the folder. "Good," he said to himself. "The louder the fool shouts, the harder the silence will strike." At yet another party, Tommy strutted through the ballroom with Becca on his arm, soaking up attention as if it were oxygen. This time he rented out an entire rooftop lounge, filling it with flowers flown in overnight from Europe. Guests gasped at the extravagance. Champagne fountains sparkled beneath the city skyline, and photographers snapped pictures he demanded be printed in society pages. Becca thrived on the spectacle. She leaned into every whisper, every glance, every shallow compliment. She basked in the spotlight, her laugh high and sharp like shattered glass. To her, every flash of a camera was proof that Agnes had been erased from memory. But not everyone admired. In corners, investors shook their heads, scribbling notes about unpaid loans. A banker whispered to his colleague, "The man is burning cash like dry leaves. Something's off." "Word is, the wife's disappeared," the other replied. "No one's seen her in months. Some say she ran. Some say he drove her away." The whispers fed themselves, swirling louder than the orchestra. Tommy, oblivious, raised his glass in a toast, proclaiming himself unstoppable. Back at the estate, Agnes sat cross-legged on her bed, her journal open. The candle beside her flickered, casting long shadows across the walls. She dipped her pen, her hands steady as she wrote with deliberate care. "They came to mock me, but I gave them silence. They wanted tears, but I gave them stone. Every laugh they spill in the streets is another step closer to their own ruin. They cannot starve destiny, because destiny was written long before them." She paused, resting her hand on her belly, feeling the faint flutter of life within. "My child," she whispered, "you are the reason I rise each day. You are the reason I will not bend. One day, when you are grown, you will know what it means to carry fire inside your veins." She closed the book gently, tucking it back into its hiding place. Humberto made his evening rounds along the estate walls, lantern in hand. The crickets sang, the night stretched long, but his mind was alert. Passing by the west wing window, he glimpsed Agnes seated at her desk, pen in hand, her face illuminated by soft light. There was no despair in her posture now, no collapse, only steadiness. He nodded to himself, whispering into the night, "La Reina Espera, the Queen waits." Whispers had a way of sticking to a man like smoke. By the end of the week, Tommy's name was everywhere, from the velvet chairs of the country club to the cracked stools of corner bars. "Have you seen him?" one shopkeeper muttered, shaking his head. "Parading that girl around like she's already the wife. Poor Agnes, gone, just like that." "Not gone," another corrected. "Locked up. I heard she hasn't been seen in months." He keeps her hidden so no one asks questions. They spoke in low tones, but the rumors spread faster than wildfire. Each story grew sharper, crueler. Some painted Tommy as the triumphant lover, others as a reckless fool, but all agreed on one thing: Becca Morris was his new love. Tommy leaned into the gossip as if it were fuel. Each night he whisked Becca to dinners, clinking glasses in full view of onlookers, laughing loud enough for whispers to double. His grin grew wider with every headline, every snicker, every envious glance. But beneath the surface, beneath the chandeliers and cigars, a different current was moving. At the estate gates, Humberto kept his vigil. He stood tall in his pressed uniform, his eyes missing nothing. And when the delivery boy brought a sealed envelope one afternoon, Humberto signed for it, slipping it beneath his jacket before anyone else noticed. Inside the guardhouse, he unsealed the wax, reading the single sheet carefully. It bore Daniel Ellison's crisp signature, short instructions written in steady hand. Discretion is survival. Prepare the queen. The hour is closer than you think. Humberto folded the letter, tucking it into the lining of his boot. His heart beat faster, not with fear but with purpose. For weeks he had watched Agnes endure in silence. Now he had a role to play beyond guarding gates. That night, under cover of darkness, Humberto saddled his motorbike and rode into town. The hum of the engine cut through the night as he wound down alleys and side streets until he reached the discreet offices of Ellison and Grant. Daniel Ellison himself awaited, lamp burning low, glasses perched on the end of his nose. The lawyer rose when Humberto entered, clasping the guard's arm firmly. "You've risked much," Daniel said. Humberto shook his head. "Not risk, duty. She carries more than a child, she carries a name, a legacy. I will not let him destroy her." Daniel's gaze sharpened. "Then we are in agreement. From this point forward, every move matters. Keep your eyes on the house, and trust only Consuela. The rest of the staff may turn if pressed." Humberto nodded once. "She will not fall while I stand." Back in the mansion, Consuela worked quietly, her hands never idle. She pressed linens, dusted shelves, carried trays. But beneath the routines, her mind was sharp, calculating. From hidden drawers, she retrieved the documents Agnes had entrusted to her: birth certificates, property deeds, notarized statements, all carefully tucked into a leather folder she kept wrapped in plain brown paper. Each night she checked them, smoothed the creases, and whispered a prayer. More than once, she caught the younger maids whispering in corners, glancing toward the locked east wing where Agnes stayed. Some looked curious, others resentful. Consuela straightened, fixing them with a gaze that left no room for doubt. "Not a word leaves these walls," she warned in her accented English. "Not to him, not to her. If you betray Senora, you betray me, and I will not forgive it." They lowered their heads quickly, murmuring compliance. Whether fear or loyalty held their tongues, Consuela did not care. Silence was all she needed. That evening, she climbed the staircase with a tray in hand, knocking softly at Agnes's door. Inside, the room was dim, lit only by a single lamp. Agnes sat at her desk, journal open, pen poised. Consuela set the tray down gently. "He grows bolder," she murmured. "More mouths repeat his name with hers. But do not fear, Daniel prepares. Humberto guards, you are not alone." Agnes lifted her eyes, fatigue shadowing her features, but her voice was steady. "The world believes me forgotten." Consuela leaned close, her whisper fierce. "Then let them believe. The louder he plays, the harder his fall will be." Agnes closed the journal, her fingers brushing its worn cover. "Then I will wait for the storm." While the world watched Tommy raise his glass to Becca, the true storm was already gathering in silence, papers stacked in drawers, oaths sworn in shadows, loyalties sealed with whispers. And in the quietest corner of the mansion, a woman once mocked as weak sat straighter, her hand resting protectively on the swell of her belly, her silence heavier than any shout. Night fell heavy over the mansion, the air thick with the scent of rain. Agnes sat by the window, rocking gently in her chair, the faint kick beneath her ribs reminding her that life stirred within. She traced circles across her belly, imagining the tiny heartbeat, the future it promised. Her eyes closed, and in that half-dreaming state, She saw a vision, a child running across wide fields, laughter unbound, sunlight painting their cheeks. No locked doors, no cruel voices, only freedom, only joy. The image steadied her spirit, anchoring her against the shadows that sought to swallow her whole. She whispered into the night, "You will never know his hands. You will never bend beneath his cruelty." The words were vow and prophecy all at once. Downstairs, the house groaned as the first gusts rattled the shutters. Wind curled through the chimneys, moaning like a warning. Candles flickered in the hallway as Consuela made her rounds, checking each window latch, whispering prayers under her breath. She paused at the study, ensuring the brown-wrapped folder of documents remained hidden. Satisfied, she crossed herself and blew out the last candle, leaving the corridor steeped in shadow. At the gatehouse, Humberto pulled his coat tighter, rain already spattering across the stones. He lit his lantern, its glow swaying in the rising wind. He scanned the road beyond the estate, empty, except for branches tossed across the ground. A storm outside, yes. But Humberto knew another storm swirled within the walls, secrets tucked into journals, silence worn like armor, a mistress parading in public while the rightful wife grew stronger in the dark. He muttered in Spanish, words carried away by the gale, "La tormenta se acerca," the storm approaches. In town, Daniel Ellison closed his office earlier than usual. He stood by his window, watching the first sheets of rain strike the pavement. The storm seemed fitting. Change always came with noise, with upheaval. He locked the file cabinet containing Agnes's documents, then placed the key into his breast pocket. Adjusting his coat, he whispered, "The pieces are moving." Thunder cracked, rattling the mansion's glass panes. Agnes jerked awake, the dream dissolving into darkness. She rose, moving to secure the shutters, her hands steady even as the wind howled. The storm outside felt alive, a mirror of everything brewing unseen. She caught her reflection in the glass, pale, weary, but not broken. Her eyes no longer carried only sadness. They held steel. A clap of thunder shook the room, but instead of fear, a strange calm spread through her. "Let it rage," she murmured. "Storms do not destroy what was meant to endure." In her sleep, Becca tossed restlessly in Tommy's arms at their downtown hotel. She hated storms, hated the way the wind clawed at windows, the way thunder rattled the bed frame. Tommy rolled over, muttering half-drunk promises about the empire they'd claim. Neither of them noticed the cracks forming, the unseen preparations building quietly miles away. Back at the mansion, Consuela slipped into Agnes's room with a lantern. "The storm grows stronger," she whispered, "but storms pass. You must hold fast." Agnes nodded, taking the maid's hand for the first time in weeks. "I will. For my child. For everything they think I've lost." Their eyes met, and for a heartbeat, both women understood they were not merely surviving, they were preparing. Rain battered the estate walls, pooling across the courtyard. Humberto's boots splashed as he paced, lantern swinging, gaze sharp. Each flash of lightning carved the world in white, each rumble of thunder rolled like drums announcing war. He thought of Daniel's words, "Prepare the queen," and in his heart he knew the queen was readying herself, even if she did not yet know how sharp her crown would cut. Agnes lay awake long after Consuela left, hand pressed over her unborn child. She whispered the same promise again and again, words lost beneath the thunder but written forever in her blood. "You will be free. You will inherit more than riches. You will inherit strength." Outside, the storm raged. Inside, silence held. But silence was not surrender. Silence was the gathering of a storm far greater than any in the sky. The storm had not relented. Sheets of rain lashed against the estate walls, rivers running down the cobblestones, lightning illuminating the iron gates in flashes of white fire. Humberto stood under his hooded coat, water dripping from the brim, lantern in hand. His posture was stiff, his jaw clenched tight. Then came the sound he had dreaded, the growl of Tommy's engine cutting through the night. Headlights carved through the downpour as the black car rolled to a stop at the gates. The horn blared, once, twice, brash and commanding. The driver's side window slid down. Tommy Fritz leaned out, rain splattering his expensive jacket, arrogance undiminished by the weather. On the seat beside him, Becca was draped in a fur stole, lipstick unbothered, her laugh bright and cruel. "Well, well," Tommy shouted above the storm, "looks like the guard dog is still awake. Open the gates, Humberto, the master's home." Becca snickered, clutching Tommy's arm. "Oh, let him through," she called mockingly. "I'm dying to see the look on Agnes's face when she realizes who really belongs here now." Humberto tightened his grip on the lantern, stepping closer to the bars. His voice was calm but firm, carrying even through the thunder. "You cannot enter." Tommy blinked, then let out a short, disbelieving laugh. "What did you say?" "I said," Humberto repeated slowly, "you cannot enter. This house is no longer yours to command." Becca leaned forward, her smirk faltering. "Are you mad? Do you know who you're speaking to?" Humberto's shoulders squared. Yes, a man who squandered honor, a man who abandoned his wife, but not a man with authority here. Lightning cracked above them, illuminating Tommy's face twisted in fury. He slammed a fist against the steering wheel. "You forget yourself, Humberto. I built this estate. I pay your wages. Open the gate before I have you dragged off this property." The guard did not flinch. "Mr. Fritz, you no longer have authority here." For the first time in years, Tommy hesitated. The storm raged, wind whipping rain sideways, but the silence between them was heavier. "Don't test me," Tommy snarled, though his voice cracked with disbelief. "Do you want to lose your job? Do you want me to ruin you?" But Humberto did not answer him. Instead, he planted his boots firmly in the mud and crossed his arms. "My loyalty is not for sale." Becca scoffed, throwing open her umbrella, though it flipped inside out in the wind. "This is ridiculous. She's finished, Tommy. Why is this servant pretending otherwise?" From across the street, lights flickered on in neighboring houses. Curtains twitched. A door creaked open. The sound of shouting had traveled through the storm, curious eyes drawn to the spectacle unfolding. A man with a coat pulled tight stepped out onto his porch, squinting through the rain. "What's going on over there?" another neighbor called from a window. Within minutes, half a dozen onlookers had gathered at the edges of the street, umbrellas tilted against the rain, whispers spreading between them. "That's Fritz, isn't it?" someone murmured. "What's he doing out there at his own gate?" "He doesn't look so welcome," another replied. The crowd swelled as the argument carried, their curiosity sharpening. Tommy noticed them, his anger curling into a sneer. He raised his voice louder, addressing Humberto but pitching his tone so the neighbors could hear. "This is absurd. I'll not be refused entry into my own house by a hired hand. Open these gates." But Humberto stood rooted, silent as stone, rain running in rivulets down his coat. The crowd's murmurs grew louder. Becca tugged on Tommy's arm, whispering fiercely, "They're watching. Don't let them see weakness." Tommy gritted his teeth, leaning further out the window. "Last chance, Humberto. Move aside, or I'll—" But the words died in his throat as another pair of headlights pierced the storm from the opposite direction. The glare of fresh headlights sliced through the rain, scattering shadows across the street. The sleek sedan slowed as it approached, tires hissing against wet pavement. The crowd shifted, umbrellas bumping as whispers rose. Who would dare drive into this storm at such an hour? Tommy's eyes narrowed. "Who the hell is this?" he spat, craning his neck. The car door opened with deliberate calm, and out stepped Daniel Ellison, his dark overcoat whipped in the wind, a leather briefcase clasped in one hand. The storm soaked his silvered hair, but his stride was unhurried, measured, as though the thunder itself made way for him. Becca's painted smile faltered. "Who's that?" she hissed to Tommy. Tommy smirked, though unease flickered behind his eyes. "A lawyer, probably chasing debts. He'll regret stepping into this circus." Daniel came to a halt before the gate, his presence commanding despite the tempest. He set the briefcase upon the stone pillar and withdrew a single sealed envelope, the crest of Ellison and Grant gleaming faintly even in the stormlight. Humberto straightened, his chest swelling with something like relief. The neighbors pressed closer, eyes wide, the rain now secondary to the unfolding drama. Tommy barked a laugh, too loud, too sharp. "Daniel Ellison, out in this weather? Tell this fool to open the gates. Remind him who owns this house." But Daniel did not look at Tommy. His gaze rested on Humberto, steady, approving. He inclined his head slightly, as if to say, "You did well." Finally, he turned toward Tommy, his voice cutting clean through the storm. "Mr. Fritz, you've mistaken the times. You speak of ownership that no longer exists." The words struck like lightning. The crowd murmured, confused. Becca clutched Tommy's arm tighter. "What does he mean?" she whispered. Tommy scoffed, waving dismissively. "He's bluffing, probably sent by creditors. Ignore him." Daniel's expression did not shift. He held the envelope higher, its seal unbroken. "This document states clearly who holds authority over this estate, and I assure you it is not you, Mr. Fritz." Gasps rippled through the onlookers, their umbrellas tilting forward, eager for every word. Tommy's voice rose, strained. "You can't bar me from my own home. This is Fritz's property." Daniel's tone sharpened, precise as a blade. "Correction, it was. Legal transfer occurred months ago, according to the will of Jonathan Rubin. The rightful heir resides within these walls." A flash of lightning illuminated Agnes's silhouette in an upstairs window, faint but unmistakable. The crowd followed Daniel's gaze, murmurs swelling into a storm of their own. Becca shook her head violently. "This is insane. That woman, she's nothing. A prisoner in her own house. You can't expect anyone to believe she's the heir." Daniel stepped closer, his polished shoes splashing in the puddles. He placed the envelope against the iron bars and spoke with calm authority. "Believe what you wish, Miss Morris, but law is not swayed by gossip. Tonight the truth stands written here." Humberto reached through the bars, his hand closing firmly around the envelope. He pressed it against his chest, water streaming down his coat. The neighbors fell into hushed silence, all eyes on the guard who had refused his master. Tommy's face twisted red, veins visible against his temples. "You think a piece of paper changes anything? I built this house, paid for every stone." Daniel's gaze was icy. "And yet, Mr. Fritz, stones cannot hide betrayal, nor do they erase the law." Becca tugged harder at Tommy's sleeve, her mask of confidence cracking. "Let's leave. This is turning ugly." But Tommy shoved her hand away, shouting over the storm, "No, they will not humiliate me." He pounded on the gate with both fists, rain flying from his sleeves. "I will burn this place down before I let it slip through my fingers." A voice rose from the crowd, sharp and clear. "Then why won't they let you in, Fritz?" Another neighbor echoed, "Why's the lawyer here if it's really yours?" The tide had turned. The neighbors' whispers no longer carried pity or curiosity, they carried judgment. Daniel retrieved his briefcase, snapping it shut with finality. He leveled one last look at Tommy. "Go home, Mr. Fritz. This storm is not yours to command." Humberto swung the lantern high, its flame fighting the wind, casting long shadows across the furious man at the gate. "Leave, before you shame yourself further." The rain poured harder, drumming against the iron like war drums. Becca yanked open the car door, sliding inside, her face pale. "Tommy, please." Tommy lingered one moment longer, chest heaving, eyes blazing. But the stares of the neighbors, the calm authority of Daniel, and the immovable presence of Humberto pressed in on him like walls. With a final roar of frustration, he climbed back into the car, slamming the door so hard the glass rattled, the engine roared, tires skidding on wet pavement as the vehicle tore away into the night. Silence followed, broken only by the storm. Daniel placed a hand on the gate, nodding once to Humberto. "Stand firm. The worst is yet to come, but so is the justice." Upstairs, Agnes lowered the curtain, her hand resting over her heart. For the first time in months, a flicker of hope warmed her chest. The storm had raged outside, but within those walls, a new dawn was already beginning to rise. The storm's fury pressed against the estate walls, thunder rolling like drums of judgment. Humberto held the lantern high, casting its glow over Daniel Ellison as he stood just beyond the gates. In his hand, the envelope sealed and solemn was more powerful than any weapon. Neighbors leaned closer, some clutching umbrellas, others bareheaded in the rain, unwilling to miss a word. Consuela had appeared quietly behind Humberto, her hands clasped tightly at her chest, eyes shining with tears she refused to shed. Daniel broke the wax seal with deliberate calm, the crack of it audible even through the storm. From within he drew several folded sheets, the paper thick, stamped with official crests. He cleared his throat, his voice carrying with surprising strength, as though the storm itself fell silent to listen. This is the last will and testament of Franklin D. Ellison, witnessed and notarized. It states, without ambiguity, that the estate known as the Fritz Mansion and all its holdings, liquid and fixed, shall pass not to Thomas Fritz, nor to any claimant through him. The sole heir, beneficiary, and legal possessor is Agnes Ellison Fritz. The words struck like lightning. Gasps rippled through the gathered crowd. Some of the neighbors crossed themselves instinctively, as though they'd witnessed something holy. Others murmured, repeating her name like a revelation. Agnes, Agnes Fritz, she's the heir. Becca's painted confidence drained away. Her lips parted, but no words came. She stumbled back against the car, gripping the door handle as if it alone kept her upright. Her mind reeled months of whispered promises, glittering visions of wealth, all collapsing into ash in a single sentence. Tommy froze, his jaw hung slack, his hand still gripping the steering wheel, though the engine idled uselessly. The arrogance that had fueled him sputtered, replaced by raw disbelief. She's nothing," he stammered, voice strangled. "A frail woman I kept. A nobody. You can't mean—" Daniel's gaze cut into him like steel. "No, Mr. Fritz, it is you who are nothing here." The neighbors gasped again, some murmuring in satisfaction, others shaking their heads at the cruelty exposed. Daniel continued, holding the document higher. "The estate belongs fully and solely to Agnes Ellison Fritz. By the law and by the will of her late grandfather, she is the rightful mistress of this house and all it commands." Becca's shoulders sagged, the fur around her neck drenched, her face pale as milk. She had tethered herself to a man stripped bare, a man undone before his own neighbors. She glanced once at Tommy, then away, shame burning hotter than the storm. Tommy lurched from the driver's seat, rain plastering his hair to his forehead. "Lies!" he roared, stumbling toward the gates. "Forgery! Tricks!" He grabbed the bars and shook them violently, his voice cracking with desperation. "That weak woman can't hold power. She doesn't deserve this." The neighbors recoiled, whispers sharpening into judgment. "He locked her in, they say," one muttered. "While parading that girl around town," another added. Consuela pressed her hands to her mouth, tears spilling at last, not from grief, but from vindication. Humberto's grip on the lantern tightened, his chest rising with restrained triumph. Daniel did not flinch. He held the will like a shield, his voice unwavering. "The law speaks plainly, Mr. Fritz. Your cruelty holds no weight against destiny written and sealed." And then, from the upstairs window, a figure moved. Curtains swept aside, and there she was, Agnes. She stepped into the storm's light, one hand braced on the frame, the other resting over her swelling belly. Her nightgown clung to her, rain already soaking the fabric as she pushed the window open. The crowd turned as one, breaths caught in their throats. Agnes's eyes found Tommy's below, her voice steady and sharp enough to slice through the thunder. "You locked me in to starve, Tommy." Her words fell like stones, heavy with truth. "But you cannot lock away destiny." For a heartbeat, the storm seemed to hush, as though even the heavens bowed to listen. Rain coursed down the glass, lightning painting Agnes's face in stark light. She leaned forward, her hand pressing firmly against her belly, her voice ringing across the courtyard. "You tried to strip me of dignity. You left me hungry, alone, carrying your child while you flaunted another woman. But tonight, Tommy, tonight the world sees you for what you are." The neighbors murmured, voices swelling into a tide of agreement. "She carried his child, and he left her starving?" one whispered. Another shook her head. "And all while chasing that mistress?" Tommy's grip on the iron bars slackened. For the first time, he looked smaller, drenched, trembling, not with fury but with fear. Becca shrank back, her umbrella long since abandoned, mascara streaking down her cheeks. "Tommy," she hissed, desperate, "say something. Don't just stand there." But his mouth opened and closed uselessly, words drowned by the storm. Daniel stepped forward, the document still in hand, his gaze unwavering. "The law has spoken. The estate, the accounts, the holdings all belong to Mrs. Agnes Ellison Fritz. You are nothing here but a trespasser." The words cut deeper than any blade. Tommy staggered, his pride shattering in front of the neighbors who had once envied him. He saw their faces now no longer deferential, no longer impressed. Only scorn remained. Agnes pushed the window wider, stepping into the rain, her nightgown plastering against her skin. She stood tall despite her weariness, her hand never leaving her belly. "You wanted me silent, you wanted me invisible, but I am still here, stronger than your lies, stronger than your cruelty." The neighbors erupted, some clapping, others cheering softly despite the storm. A woman crossed herself again, whispering, "God bless her." Becca's knees buckled. She grabbed Tommy's arm for balance, but he shoved her away, too consumed by his unraveling. She stumbled into the mud, her once pristine gown ruined. The neighbors saw it all, and their whispers turned sharp as knives. She thought she'd be mistress of the house. Look at her now, dirt on her hands, nothing left. Becca's face twisted, shame searing her. For the first time she realized she had bet on a man already sinking. Tommy pounded the bars weakly, his strength fading. "Agnes, you can't do this, you're mine. You'll always be mine." Agnes's laugh was cold, fierce, a sound the neighbors would remember for years. "Yours? I was never yours. I belonged to my own blood, my own destiny, and you were too blind to see it." Daniel closed the folder with finality, his voice calm but resolute. "It is finished. Tomorrow the courts will confirm the transfer publicly, but tonight everyone present is witness. Mrs. Agnes Ellison Fritz is the sole heir." Humberto raised the lantern higher, the flame steady against the wind, a symbol of allegiance. Consuela stepped forward, her eyes on Agnes, and bowed her head deeply. One by one, neighbors followed, lowering their umbrellas, some nodding in silent respect, others bowing their heads. The tide had turned fully. Agnes was no longer the pitied prisoner. She was the rightful matriarch. Agnes straightened, rain streaming down her face, but her eyes blazed with something brighter than the lightning. "Tommy, you tried to bury me, but you only planted me deeper. And now I rise." Her words carried, echoing through the storm. Tommy slumped against the bars, defeated, the weight of his ruin pressing down until even Becca stepped away from him, disgust twisting her lips. The neighbors began to disperse, murmuring of justice, of destiny fulfilled. Humberto unlocked the side gate just enough for Daniel to step inside. Consuela followed, her lantern guiding them up the path. Agnes withdrew from the window at last, leaving Tommy staring up into emptiness. Daniel's final words drifted back to him through the storm. "Go, Mr. Fritz. The gates of this house will never open to you again." The storm raged on, but inside those walls a new reign had begun. The storm began to ease, but the damage was already done. The courtyard was alive with the glow of cell phone screens as neighbors lifted their devices, recording every second of Tommy's unraveling. Once, people had lowered their heads when he passed. Once, his arrogance commanded silence. Now they raised their phones, hungry to capture his fall. "Look at him," a young man whispered, lens trained on Tommy's shaking figure. The mighty Fritz, nothing but a beggar at his own gates. Tommy's fists slammed against the iron, the sound hollow and pitiful. "Open! This is my house." His voice cracked, no longer the bellow of authority but the shriek of a desperate man. No one moved to help him. Even Becca edged away, her heels sinking into the wet ground, mascara streaking like ink across her pale face. She tugged at her ruined gown, trying to salvage dignity, but her eyes betrayed her panic. A woman's voice rose from the crowd. That's what she suffered, while carrying his child? Gasps and mutters swelled. Judgment was no longer whispered, it was shouted, fueled by the blue glow of cameras and the thrill of public spectacle. Becca glanced around, eyes darting like a cornered animal. She saw the phones trained on her too, and the humiliation burned hotter than the rain soaking her skin. She pressed a hand to her face, turned, and slipped into the shadows of the street. Not a soul called after her. Not even Tommy. He barely noticed. His forehead pressed against the wet bars, his voice hoarse. "Agnes, "You can't do this to me. I made you. I gave you everything." But the neighbors laughed now, cruel and cutting. "You gave her nothing but hunger," someone shouted. Another added, "She's the one with everything, you're the one outside." Tommy's knees buckled. He sank into the mud, hands still gripping the bars as if the iron itself might pity him. His suit, once immaculate, was a sodden ruin clinging to him like rags. The gates he had strutted through for years stood firm, colder and stronger than he had ever been. And for the first time the neighbors saw him not as a man of power, but as what he truly was, broken. The storm's final raindrops slid down the iron gates, glinting in the lantern light like tears. Inside the courtyard, Agnes descended the staircase, her steps steady, every inch the rightful mistress of the house. Humberto was the first to approach. His shoulders, once bent in deference to Tommy, squared with pride as he bowed slightly before Agnes. "Signora, from this day, no gate will open unless you wish it." She placed her hand over his, her eyes warm despite the cold night. "You've guarded these walls with honor. Now you'll guard them for me and for the future I carry." Consuela stepped forward next, tears shimmering on her cheeks. She grasped Agnes's hand between her work-worn palms. "Mi niña, you will never stand alone again. This house will echo with your voice, not with his cruelty." Agnes drew both of them close, the three forming a quiet circle amid the dispersing neighbors. "You gave me strength when I had nothing. I will give you security when I have everything." Together they turned toward the mansion, its tall windows glowing faintly as though awakened. The doors, which had once been a prison's barrier, now stood waiting to receive their true mistress. Agnes paused at the threshold, rain dripping from her hair, her hand cradling her belly. She whispered softly, words meant only for the child within, "You will never know chains, only freedom." She crossed the threshold, and the heavy doors closed with a resonant thud behind her, not closing on her, but on him. Outside, Tommy still knelt in the mud, pounding weakly at gates that no longer answered to his hand. His shouts dissolved into silence as neighbors shook their heads, their recordings already spreading into the night, sealing his disgrace forever. Inside, Agnes stood tall in the great hall. Once locked away, she was now sovereign. Once silenced, she was now the voice that would shape a $600 million legacy, and the story of the locked wife ended not in chains, but in triumph. If Agnes's story struck a chord with you, take a second right now. Tap like, hit subscribe, and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I read every single one. And if you want to see what Agnes builds next or watch another story where betrayal turns into justice, check out the 2 videos pinned right here on screen after this one.